In this proof, we're going to look at proving the base angles theorem, so showing that in an isosceles triangle that the base angles are always congruent. So we are given that AB is congruent to BC and X is the midpoint of AC. So anytime we write a proof, you should always start off with writing the givens. AB is congruent to BC and X is the midpoint of AC. You can write them as one step or as two steps. Here I'm writing them as two separate steps. Either way would be okay. Anytime you're given a congruent statement, you should always mark those pieces congruent on the figure. AB is congruent to BC. Then you want to look at your other given statement, X is the midpoint of AC, and see what you know is congruent because of that statement. Because X is the midpoint of AC, we know that AX is congruent to CX because of the definition of a midpoint. So AX is congruent to CX by the definition of a midpoint. So right now we have one pair of sides congruent and another pair of sides congruent. Now looking at these two triangles, I also know that BX is congruent to BX. It's congruent to itself. BX is congruent to BX, and I know that BX is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. So now I have my third pair of corresponding parts of these two triangles congruent. Now I can say that the two triangles are congruent to each other. So triangle BAX is congruent to triangle BCX, and I know they are congruent because I know all three of their sides are congruent. Now remember, I'm trying to prove that those base angles are congruent. Because I know that those two triangles are congruent, I can say that all of the corresponding parts are now congruent also. So I didn't prove that, I didn't know that for sure any of the angles were congruent, but now because I know the two triangles are congruent, I can say any of their corresponding parts are congruent. So now I can say that angle BAX is congruent to angle BCX, and I know that by that CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are always congruent. That's the proof of the base angle theorem, because now I know that BAX is congruent to BCX, so the base angles of that isosceles triangle are congruent.